as an alternative, when we have a scenario where we've built up like we've showed you here with our 3/8 of an inch foam rail, it's not a bad idea to bevel this edge. The last thing you want is, after you've just completed a beautiful piece of work, is for this edge to fray or chip with use. So one thing you can do is use what we refer to as a hand edger. Now, do you have to use the hand edger? Absolutely not. Sometimes what we'll do is when we strip the form off tomorrow after the material is fully set, we'll come back with a grinder and bevel the edge, or take a rubbing stone and we'll soften that edge with a rubbing stone. But just for demonstration purposes, we're going to show you that with some practice, you can actually get through and create a nice edge with this material. So in essence, there's really no reason to come back and bevel the following day. Now you notice I'm cleaning my form edge, and it's a real soft touch. I'm not pushing real hard here. And as you can see, that's just created a very nice rolled over edge. And then all I'm going to do one last time, very gently, I'm not pushing hard. If I push hard, it's going to seal it off and create blisters. So it's almost as if I'm dragging the trowel more than just troweling. Now we've got a nice clean edge. Roughly 2.5 hours after our application of Passo stamp overlay, we're ready to start stamping. Oftentimes I'll have students or customers ask, when is a good opportune time to know when to stamp? And certainly with the changing conditions, it's going to vary substantially. It could be as little as 30 minutes in the heat of the summer, or in our case, almost 3 hours in a cool warehouse. So you'll have to simply get in a routine of touching the material, and you shouldn't get any material releasing back off on your fingers. So if I push down here and stamp overlay comes back on my fingers, that's certainly too soon. Another good gauge, believe it or not, if you feel the tendon right here in your hand where the plasticity, that's a really good gauge. If you kind of flex your hand and feel that tendon, that really works good, believe it or not, to find out when it's a good opportune time to use a stamp overlay. So we're doing two different applications. We're doing a pattern stamp in a wood plank, and we're doing what's called a seamless texture skin in the infield. Now, I'm not a huge fan of using a powdered release on applications with stamp overlay. What happens is they're very heavy polymerized, and sometimes if you use a traditional powder release like what's used in stamped concrete, the polymer tends to lock in that powdered release, and it's next to impossible to remove it the following day. So what I do like to do is start off with a clear liquid release, okay, which is what we're about to apply, and then we'll do our stamping, and then we can come back and follow up with a tinted liquid release. So what we've done is we've taken the chroma powdered release like you would use on traditional stamped concrete, and we've put it into a separate container as a tint, and we're tinting our liquid release in essence. And by spraying it on after the fact, it'll go down into the low-lying areas, the nooks and the crannies of the stamped texture, and it'll actually tint it, so you can get some nice coloring effects that way. Be careful if you're working on a sloped area like a driveway, for example, and if you spray this too heavy, it'll tend to run and follow the slope, so you never want that to happen. So what we started off with is we determined that the stamp width of the wood grain texture is 11.5 inches. So we just marked a little line in the overlay, 11.5 inches, and now we're simply going to come back and snap it right into the wet material. Okay, so now we just come in here and determine our line like you see right there. That gives us a gauge enabling us to start. Now that we're good to go, we've determined that it's ready, I'm going to go ahead and release the whole panel with our clear liquid release. You want to spray a nice uniform layer. You don't want to puddle the material. On a large application, you're going to be walking out on the mats, and one person will be spraying the field right in front of all the mats. Here it's a small application, 8 foot by 8 foot, so we're able to just spray a mist on everything right in front of us. In addition to that, we always want to texture our stamping mats too for additional release. Now, since we've already determined where our wood grain stamp pattern is going, I'm going to come in here and just lightly see what stage of plasticity this material is at. So I'm just going to worry about texturing right here. I'm going to go right to that edge, which that looks great. Okay, here I can go a little bit tighter. Right now I'm only worrying about the edges. You notice before I just lift the whole mat up, I check it. I want to make sure that we're getting a sufficient amount of texture. And that looks great. Also notice when I lift the stamp mat up, you never want to drag it across the surface. So I want to make sure we're right up to that edge, which that looks great. Notice how I roll this and lift straight up, okay? That's the texture that we're looking for. Now what we're going to do is demonstrate one of the wood plank textures. Okay, so here, this is a little bit more of a rigid tool, so it's probably going to allow us to come on in and tap the texture right into it. Now once again, before I just remove the whole stamp, I'm going to check for texture. Right there I'm a little bit light. Tap it a little bit harder. Check this side. That looks great. Check this side. And that looks great. Now, since we're working on such a small panel, we're going to flip this tool so we don't get the same grain of texture. Normally, if you're doing a long run, you're going to have as many as 4 or 5 of these tools so you don't see the repeating grain of texture. Okay. Before we lift it, once again, we're checking for texture. That looks great. That looks nice. And it's time to remove. There's our wood texture. So what we'll do is we'll continue our process now with our seamless texture in the field, followed by the wood texture on the perimeter. As a final detail, what we do like to do is come in and follow this grout joint with a hand chisel. And at this stage of plasticity, all you have to do is simply push down, and that really defines and details that joint. There's no need to really push any harder than you see here. And then you can see how nicely that cleans right back up. Even to the point where right here, on this joint right here, simply push down, and now we have a really nice, crisp, clean stamp edge like you see. Now obviously I'm physically out on the mats themselves. So what we did is we started with a leapfrog. We laid our first mat down, followed by the second mat. So here's what we need to do. On a stampable overlay, I would rather get on it at this phase where I'm actually lightly tamping texture into it. Some people get on it too soon, and they call that term as puddling. They actually use their feet and work the material in like that. The problem is if you hit a wet spot, it's just going to mushroom right out. So if you have enough mats and enough people to help, this is the preferred method. Now, a common mistake I see people make is they don't do this little step. And what's really important is to lift this mat up, the previous mat, fold it under, and then give that a light tap. What that does, it gets rid of the outline perimeter of the stamp. You don't want to see the outline of the stamp. So now what we do is we simply roll this mat, pick it up, the texture looks awesome. Go right to this edge, carefully. I'm going to check, see how close we are, right to the edge. Come over here, tap texture. Once again, I'm going to lift this up. And that's about the extent that we need. Now, it's not uncommon to see this start to accumulate here. So if you see this building up, grab a rag and just wipe it off. If not, it's going to continue to collect every time you move the stamp. So it is a good idea. I'll just pull it off over here. And we'll get it cleaned off. Now you'll notice too, I always turn the mat. I'll never pick it up like this and just set it straight back down. I always turn it at least 90 degrees. So here we're close to the edge, so I'm able to just come right in here. Remember, I've got our line here for our wood texture. I want to try to avoid getting a lot of texture over here, so that's why I'm just hand tapping this. I'm going to look and see, and we are ready for that larger mat again. Leapfrog this. Now they do make these shoes, which are really great if you're trying to cover large areas. In other words, if you're stamping 2,000, 3,000 square feet, you're using much bigger mats, and you need to get on it sooner than we're at. You would simply just step into these, and what it does is it displaces your weight, and it doesn't leave bird baths or depressions in your stamp overlay. Check our texture. Texture's looking very nice right there. And because we're right to a corner, I'll simply use the smaller mat here. I can roll this back. And that's great, great texture. So while Leanne is cleaning up that mat, we're going to get our next section of wood plank stamp ready to go here. But you saw how it built up there. It's not the end of the world. Here's where it picked up. You simply come back here, tap light texture, check it, and then roll it right off the surface. And problem solved. Okay. Come here. Check it. Looks good. One last section right here.